We're looking at the Baker Illustrated Guide to the Bible, pages 82 and 83, talking about the Old Testament book of Nahum. Okay, the central teaching of Nahum is that God is going to destroy Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrians, because of their brutal subjugation of the other nations. Okay, the setting is it's really interrelated with the 12 minor prophets, specifically Jonah, as we did with Nineveh again. Okay. Jonah, if you remember, he, everybody remembers the story because it's taught, especially as children, was told to go to Nineveh. He didn't, get out of the whale, eventually went to Nineveh. And the city of Nineveh repents, and they escape judgment during the time of Jonah. Then they basically forget about it. It's very short-lived. And then Nahum comes on, and he basically once again is saying, you're not doing what God has asked you to do, and points out that the repentance of the whole entire city is very short-lived, and now they're going to suffer the punishment. The Assyrians are the world force at this time, and they're the ones, Nineveh is their capital city, and they're during this last part of the 8th century, beginning of the 7th century BC. They have grown into a very powerful force, a very ferocious force. Again, their capital is at Nineveh. They eventually destroy Israel in around 722 BC, and they're trying to besiege Jerusalem around 701 BC. And this is what Nahum basically comes into, okay? He realizes Assyria is a world power, and he announces judgment on them because that's what God has told him to do. And this is the message that he brings to the Assyrians and specifically to Nineveh. He proclaims judgment on the Assyrians and destruction of their capital city, Nineveh. He declares judgment using colorful and very graphic language, very detailed in telling them what's going to happen to them. And he says, everyone who hears about the fall of the Assyrians will clap their hands. And he's, just sitting there, telling this to everybody and to the kings. The outline of Nahum is the first part of chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, is God's wrath against his enemies like Nineveh. And then the second part of chapter 1, verses 12 to 15, there's the destruction in Nineveh, restoration and peace in Judah. And then chapters 2 and 3 talk about the attack and the destruction of Nineveh. And a couple interesting features here that I want to talk about is Nahum basically is taunting the kings of Assyria. He's talking about everybody's going to clap their hands, and I could just imagine him up there in front of everybody, like demonstrating and pointing it out. And this has to take courage. You're talking about a world power and people who are very warlike and ferocious and causing lots of mayhem. And he basically stands up in front of them and says, God's going to destroy you. And when they do, everybody's going to be like, yay, we're glad you're all gone. It takes some courage to do that. Also, another interesting feature is that it mentions the destruction of Thebes, which is an important Egyptian event that will happen, okay? Lastly, it says Nahum is a reminder that God ultimately brings about judgment and punishment on those who oppose him and oppress his people. In the book of Jonah, God responds with compassion and forgiveness for the people of Nineveh when they humble themselves, fast, cease from doing evil deeds, and cry out to God for deliverance. However, as time passes and Assyria becomes a brutal, vicious, empire-building nation, God's wrath is aroused. Because the current generation lacks repentance, God judges them, using the Babylonians to destroy Nineveh, just as Nahum predicted. Thanks.